Well, we can study the Palestinian response to the crisis in Gaza, or we can ask someone to explain it. I really feel like the media is assuming a lot of knowledge about this conflict that maybe should not be assumed. So that's why I've invited Ramzy Baroud back to the program. He's a Palestinian American. He's been on our show before, but not since the October 7th attacks on Tel Aviv and the Israeli government's response to basically destroy all of Gaza. So thank you for joining me. I would like you to sort of break this down like I'm 5 years old. Why did Hamas launch the October 7th attacks? Can we start there?
Absolutely. There is the starting point here, Natalie, would have to be from how the media in the US decided to perceive what is happening in Palestine and Israel. And one term that pretty much everybody has used from the American officials, mainstream media, even mainstream celebrity, is the term unprovoked. This is an unprovoked attack. Now, if I am a person just who is not aware in the least of what is happening in Palestine and Israel, and someone tells me unprovoked, I will develop a position saying, well, since it's unprovoked, Israel had every right to do what it's doing, but maybe they are being a bit much about it. But that's a question I would really like to deal with, the term unprovoked. And how do you do that? Let's unpack two different issues here. Who are the people of Gaza, and who are the fighters that we Palestinians call the resistance who carried out the October 7 attacks? Let's look at the population of Gaza. Over 70%, in some estimates, they say even more, are either refugees or descendants of refugees who come from historic Palestine. Historic Palestine is today's Israel. Now, the people of Gaza, about 2.3 million of them, they live under the most impoverished conditions because not because they are uneducated and they can't find jobs. To the contrary, the education level in Palestine is one of the highest in the Middle East, despite of the Israeli occupation, despite the system of apartheid. But they are poor because they are under a hermetic Israeli siege that has extended from 2006 or 2007 until today, uninterrupted. So you have refugees living under siege. They have no political rights whatsoever. None of their political aspirations have been met. And even their right to protest peacefully at the fence separating this besieged enclave from Israel, they are met with sniper fires. Hundreds of Palestinian children, really mostly minors, about 80 to 90% of all of those killed at the fence protesting are under the age of 18 or 17. They can't even do that. So that takes us to the second question. Who are the people who carried out the fight? Now, the media and including frankly some sympathetic media, just simply because they are not aware of the deeper meanings of all of this, they are perceiving this to be a Hamas-Israel war. Hamas was established in 1987. Prior to that, for about 40 years, 39 to 40 years, Israel had existed. It existed on the ruins of historic Palestine. It existed as an occupying power. And those who did the fighting during those 14 years were not the Islamists. The Islamists were not even part of any of this discussion. They were secular groups that are part of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. And many of them were socialists. In fact, it was the communists of Gaza that fought against the Israeli occupation in the 60s and in the 70s and up to the 80s. In the late 80s, the Islamic movements began emerging in Gaza. And it's these Islamic movements that eventually represent the current core of the resistance. But that doesn't mean that all Palestinians are Islamists or all Palestinians voted for Hamas, or if this is actually about Hamas per se, because if Hamas didn't exist, the resistance would have continued either way. The people who carried out the attack on October 7 are people who were either born during the siege or were children. They were toddlers when the siege was imposed. We are looking at about 17 years here. Many of them were in their late teens, early 20s. So they were children when the siege started. And it also meant that they have never stepped a foot outside Gaza. So you are talking about an isolated generation, an alienated generation, a marginalized generation that had very little access to food, no access to hospitals, no access to universities, no access to their families in the West Bank, being trained with the idea that the only way you can break this siege, and it's hard to argue against that logic, to be entirely frank, and I'll tell you why. The only way to break the siege is to fight your way out. And the reason that it's hard
Right,
to
but I'd like
fight
to
against it,
sort of push
go
back
ahead.
against that just a little bit, because I understand the need to break out of this cage. But the idea when it brings in innocent civilians, how is that brought into the plan?
If you asked me this question on October 7th or 8th, I would have given, just to make this easy, kind of a blank condemnation. And I still do condemn any and it's not really my responsibility. I'm not a political leader or spokesman for any of these groups, but we Palestinians understand that since our civilians are in constant danger, as we see the genocide happening in Gaza, we should not be in a position in which we justify in any way the intentional targeting of civilians. But because the Israeli narrative began breaking down from the decapitated babies that was repeated by Biden, by CNN, by all the mainstream channels in the United States, and then the rape and the, all of these things, and all of them were proven either untrue or were not substantiated in any way, it becomes difficult to actually go and make that condemnation, knowing that this is going to be used against Palestinians and we actually don't know.
Okay, that I understand because, yes, please.
Yes, absolutely. Let's have an investigation. We see what Israel is doing in Gaza. Let's get the United Nations involved, the Human Rights Council of the UN, to investigate what happened in Israel on October 7th. And anyone who has carried out any intentional attack on civilians has to be held accountable. But Israel and Israeli war criminals in Gaza also have to be held accountable. So this is what we've been asking for all these years, is international investigation that does not involve American pressure or Washington's intervention.
Okay, I completely understand that. I do think that we need to wait to see what's true and what's not. And this is a vociferous war of propaganda right now. And I don't put any stock into politicians saying they condemn this or they condemn that, as long as civilians are dying and there is no call for a ceasefire to figure it all out. But one of the things that I think those of us who are outside might wonder is, wouldn't Hamas have known that no matter the extent of the attack, whether it was as brutal as they say or not, that it would cause Israel to rain down hell on Gaza? And is there a
Absolutely.
movement or a thought that, like, oh my God, what have they done? What have they brought to our doorstep?
Okay, so let me tell you what is my own perception and what is being said, because this is a very kind of active conversation happening,
Okay.
not within Palestine itself, but even in the Middle East as well. We know that if you capture a single Israeli soldier, Israel is going to rain hell on Gaza and kill hundreds. So imagine if you capture nearly 150 soldiers, plus settlers, plus civilians, and so forth and so on. So what is going to happen then? If we just look a little bit earlier between what happened in September when Benjamin Netanyahu stood in front of the General Assembly with a map of the Middle East with the words the new Middle East on it, and between what happened on October 7th, maybe we can begin to understand why this attack was launched the way it was. It seemed that it sorted out that Palestine is no longer a cause for the Arabs, for the Muslims, for the Middle East, for the world. Every attempt at pressuring Israel to concede to a single UN resolution has failed. Palestinians are being gunned down at a large number in the West Bank. The UN says 2022 was the highest number of Palestinians killed since 2005. That's in the West Bank alone. In 2023, they broke that record by June. So Israel is becoming yet more and more violent. plans to take over, annex the West Bank, it's a done deal. It's over for Palestinians. Now, when the Palestinians look at their allies in the Middle East, say the Saudis, the Saudis are now normalizing. There is a new Middle East, and Netanyahu stands in front of the United Nations General Assembly and he announces, this is the new Middle East. The Saudis are with us, the Bahrainis, the Emiratis, the Moroccans, the Sudanese. It's over for you Palestinians. And all of this happening with Palestine not being part of the conversation. Now, as someone who traveled and lived in many Muslim countries as a journalist, throughout the years, I tell you, many countries, especially Indonesia, Malaysia, and others, these large countries of large Muslim population, they look at Saudi Arabia for their foreign policy. I'm not saying that they don't have independent foreign policy. I'm saying that they are, in a way, try to find the balance because of the spiritual power that the Saudis have because of the Mecca and because of Islamic holy sites and so forth. It would have only been natural for the Saudis to normalize and other large Muslim majority countries to normalize. If Palestinians lose that last line of defense, it is over. The Palestinian cause is going to turn into something else entirely. So the debate within the Palestinian community now is, should have we done this knowing we are going to recenter Palestine as the top of the agenda of the entire region, and carry on with our resistance as usual, or not take that risk and maybe save some lives for now, but having Palestine completely lost as a cause that matters in the middle. And that becomes a strategic question. And I know the outcome is painful. And if I were in that position, would I have made it as a political analyst? I don't know. But this is at least the rationale that is prevailing in Palestine and in Gaza in particular.
Right. And so is that, you think, what the narrative is that is motivating people to go to pro-Palestinian rallies? Is that like, hey, Palestine, they had to break free. That's why we're here, because I think the media is showing that that is automatic anti-Semitism. And I think that bears looking into, because of course you can want Palestine to be free and also not be anti-Semitic at the same time, but it is inspiring anti-Semitism. So can you respond to that?
Yes, absolutely. Now, again, this argument maybe would have had a little bit of kind of potential to become a conversation. This is no longer there. I mean, I heard Scott Ritter, I believe, a few days ago saying, if Israel has lost me, and it did, I think it's going to lose everybody. Because there's always been this kind of group of people. You have your hardcore pro-Palestine people. These are the people coming from different ideological schools of thoughts, different humanitarian schools of thoughts, and people who read a lot and they are familiar with the Palestinian discourse. And then you have your hardcore Israeli supporters, but you also have this group in the middle that maybe is kind of nominally pro-Israel just because CNN and others say Israel is a good idea, right? Well, that group is now shifting to the Palestinian side. They tell you, even if we don't understand what is the politics of it all, there can never be a justification of carrying out a genocide against innocent people. And so we are flooded. I mean, like the number of influencers that are reaching out to us, wanting our point of view, speaking out for Palestine. These are people who do, kind of makeup products. And then suddenly they are part of a political conversation. I have been doing this for 3 decades. It's completely unprecedented to me, this kind of attention and support that Palestine. Now we need to create a clear separation between this whole anti-Semitism claim, which in some cases is true. There
Yes.
are people there who hate the Jews for being Jews, and that's not going to change anything, but then you have this
Yes, and I
large
just
group
want
of
to
people who are
validate
saying
that
being
it's very
pro-Palestine
scary right
doesn't
now to be
necessarily mean being
Jewish,
anti-Semitic.
and it's very scary to be Middle Eastern. It's scary to be both groups right now, and that both fears are valid. And so
Absolutely, but just watching the Jewish activists, the pro-Palestine Jewish activists, particularly with the Jewish Voice for Peace,
yes,
taking over the House of Representatives, taking over the New York train stations, and this is really, in my opinion, this is the most functional use of our activism, when Jewish student groups, when Jewish civil society groups, with Jewish activists and rabbis go to the street and say, no, we have to make a clear separation. We stand with the Palestinians because once we said never again, and it should be never again to everybody. But this is not, Netanyahu does not represent the Jewish people, and Israel is not the capital of the Jewish religion. And we need to create this very clear separation. Otherwise, indeed, this could be mistaken for something entirely different.
Now, this is a really obvious question, but I still feel like I want to ask it because you see this devastation, and I know that the borders have not been opened for evacuation of Gaza, and Israel keeps saying, well, we warned them. We tell each building when we're going to bomb them. But why do we not see more exodus? Is there really just this appetite to hold on to this one piece of land?
You know, there's a lot. The question is being answered by many, as in Egypt is saying no. Egypt has rejected Antony Blinken's offer to, but I have a different take on it. And as a historian, you need to look for historical precedents. Did this happen before? Did Palestinians leave Gaza at one point? And indeed they have. A few years ago, the situation was so dire. Israel was cutting off fuel supplies, electricity. The situation was horrific. There was no food. So at one point, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians began gathering at the crossing between Egypt and Gaza. And they actually crossed the border. They overpowered the Egyptian army. And they crossed in their hundreds of thousands. Some estimates say about 500,000 crossed the border. But here's the thing. Every single one of them, save 250 students who needed to go to Russia or Ukraine or other countries, every single one of them came back. They bought food, they bought supplies, they bought fuel, they bought whatever life-saving things that they needed, and then they came back to Gaza. And this is my theory. I really don't think it's about the Egyptian army. Yes, there are those who are going to stand up and maybe even shoot at Palestinians trying to cross the border, but in the Egyptian army in general is quite sympathetic to the Palestinians. And I don't think they are going to allow for another massacre, and they would have allowed Palestinians to cross. Palestinians are not crossing into Egypt because they don't want to cross into Egypt. So they are being chased after by bomb. They are going from the north to the south. Beit Lahia, Nusayrat, Khan Yunis, Rafah, and so forth and so on. They are just running in circles. But nobody seems to be following this arrow that is taking them to Egypt and not bringing them back.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody's fooled in the fact that they want them to be evacuated and stay there. And I believe that even the Israeli former defense minister said, well, we'll make them camps, and then that is their life, right? So I don't know who would wish that on a refugee life on anybody. But I really do appreciate your analysis of this. I've been watching your show on YouTube for this context, and I was really happy that you decided to come to talk to us today. So where can we find your YouTube channel?
Actually, it would be better to follow me on TikTok, which is at Ramzy Baroud official. I am available on YouTube, but there's shadow banning and all of that. But my TikTok channel is more active and has more freedom to speak out. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you again for your time. I can't say how much I appreciate it.
Thank you, Natali. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.